A solitary rider moves under the cover of darkness. The city sleeps, unaware that it is being watched. They face terrifying political opposition, yet they refuse to stop. They stand on the scaffolding with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. We fortify our schedules. We build stricter rules and better habits, hoping that if we just make the external structure of our lives rigid enough, the internal anxiety, the hidden compromises, or the spiritual deadness will disappear. We construct massive behavioral walls to keep the enemy out, never realizing that the true threat is not an invading army. A strong perimeter cannot save a dead heart. A fortified gate cannot cure internal corruption. The people of Jerusalem were successfully repairing the architecture, but they were entirely incapable of repairing themselves. The wall was going up. The stones were being strengthened. But how long can a fortified wall protect a rotting society? The answer is brutally short. The architecture was supposed to bring peace, stability, and dignity to the returned exiles. But before the timber is even set in the gates, the hidden rot completely gives way. The city plunges into a devastating, unthinkable crisis, proving that the greatest danger to God's people was never on the outside of the wall. Suddenly, the sound of the hammers stops. The shouts of the builders fall silent. The wall is only half finished. But the construction comes to a jarring halt. The disruption does not come from Sanballat. It does not come from an invading army or a surprise attack at the gates. The threat that stops the work of God comes from a great outcry rising up within the city itself, against impossible odds. They rebuild the massive defensive walls of the city in an astonishing 52 days. It is a stunning administrative, physical, and spiritual victory. In Nehemiah 5, the narrative is violently interrupted by an internal economic crisis. A severe famine has struck the region. At the same time, the Persian imperial machine continues to demand its exorbitant taxes. Indifferent to whether the crops have failed, the working-class citizens of Jerusalem are starving. To buy grain for their families and to pay the king's tax, they are forced to mortgage their fields, their vineyards, and their homes. But they are not borrowing money from the Persians or the surrounding nations. They are borrowing from their own wealthy Jewish brothers. The nobles and officials of Jerusalem see the desperation of their neighbors, and instead of offering mercy, they see a lucrative business opportunity. They begin charging extortionate interest. When the poor inevitably default on these impossible loans, the wealthy elites foreclose on their ancestral lands. And when the land is gone, the poor are forced to do the unthinkable. They sell their own sons and daughters into slavery, just to keep the rest of the family alive. The people cry out to Nehemiah in agony. Our flesh is the same as that of our kindred. Our children are the same as their children. The gates are hung. The perimeter is secured. But almost everyone stops reading before the final chapter. Yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves. Step back and look at the horrifying irony of this scene. The entire story of the Bible up to this point is built on God delivering his people from slavery. He rescued them from the brutal oppression of Pharaoh in Egypt. He brought them out of their bitter captivity in Babylon. Now, they have finally returned to the promised land. They are supposedly doing the holy work of rebuilding God's city. Yet, within the shadow of the rising wall, they have become the slave masters. They are repeating the exact sins of the pagan empires, crushing their own families for financial gain. They are building a fortress to protect themselves from the enemy, completely blind to the fact that they have become the enemy. When Nehemiah hears this, he is enraged. He immediately halts the construction project. He calls a great public assembly and directly confronts the nobles and officials. He publicly shames them, demanding that they stop charging interest and return the confiscated lands, vineyards, and children immediately. The elite recognize his political authority and the overwhelming anger of the crowd. They back down, agreeing to restore everything. The familiar interpretation is not entirely wrong. It is simply incomplete. If you read all the way to the end of Nehemiah's story, Nehemiah forces them to take a solemn oath before the priests to keep their promise. and the immediate crisis is averted. The injustice is corrected. The work on the wall resumes. But a chilling reality has been permanently exposed. Nehemiah was able to stop the abuse and force a momentary correction. He used his immense political power to legislate morality and stop the bleeding. But can an angry governor legislate a permanent change of heart? Nehemiah knows the answer is no. A fortified wall around a corrupt, unjust society does nothing but protect the corruption. External compliance to a forced oath is not the same as internal transformation. If the city is going to truly survive, the limestone is not enough. The people themselves must be rebuilt. So, with the physical perimeter finally secured, Nehemiah turns to the most powerful tool he has to fix the broken souls inside. On the 25th day of the month of Elul, the final stone is set into place. The wall is finished. It took exactly 52 days, but the celebration does not center on the limestone. Instead, the focus shifts to the square before the water gate. A high wooden platform is constructed above the crowds. Ezra, the scribe, who has been quietly present in the city, steps up to the podium. You do not find a joyful, lasting celebration. You find a nightmare. By the final pages, the great visionary leader is not cutting a ribbon and unrolls the scroll of the law of Moses. As the heavy parchment is opened, the entire assembly stands up as one for hours, from daybreak until noon. Ezra reads aloud. The Levites move through the massive crowd, translating and explaining the text so everyone can understand. And as the words wash over the people, a strange sound begins to rise in the square. It is not the sound of cheering. It is the sound of weeping. The people hear the pure demands of God's law, and they suddenly recognize the terrifying depth of their own failure. Nehemiah and Ezra have to quiet the crowd, urging them not to mourn but to celebrate, reminding them that the joy of the Lord is their strength. What follows in Nehemiah chapters 8 through 10 is one of the most stunning moments of spiritual renewal in the Old Testament. The people separate themselves from foreign influence. They fast in sackcloth and ashes. They recite a sweeping, beautiful prayer recounting God's historical faithfulness and their own relentless rebellion. And then, they do something unprecedented. They decide that spoken repentance is not enough. They draw up a binding, written covenant. The leaders, the Levites, and the priests affix their official seals to the document. The rest of the people bind themselves with a curse and an oath to follow the law of God. They make 3 highly specific, non-negotiable promises. First, they will not intermarry with the surrounding pagan nations or resting in his success. He is furious. He is throwing household furniture out of the temple chambers. He is physically beating men in the streets, protecting their families from idolatry. Second, they will fiercely guard the Sabbath day, refusing to buy or sell from foreign merchants on the holy day. Third, they will bring their firstfruits and tithes to the temple, explicitly vowing, "We will not neglect the house of our God." This is the true pinnacle of the book. The grand climax of the narrative is not the dedication of the architecture, but the dedication of the people. They have successfully rebuilt the physical perimeter to keep the enemy out. Now, through this written covenant, they believe they have built a spiritual perimeter to keep the corruption out. It appears to be the perfect, happy ending. The external structure is secure. The internal rules are strictly codified. The leadership has successfully managed a total civic and spiritual revival. If you close the book at the end of chapter 12, it is a flawless victory, but there is a detail ticking quietly in the background. Nehemiah is still a royal official of the Persian Empire. His leave of absence eventually expires, and he is recalled to Susa to serve King Artaxerxes. The great governor leaves Jerusalem. This creates a terrifying test for the people's newly signed covenant. What happens to forced behavior modification when the strong leader is no longer watching? To enforce it? Years later, Nehemiah finally returns to the city he rebuilt, and what he finds destroys the illusion of external reform completely. He is screaming at the citizens and violently pulling the hair out of their heads. The book does not end with a triumphant crescendo, it ends. When Nehemiah finally returns to Jerusalem, he does not find a city thriving in holiness. He rides through the very gates he built, only to witness a total, catastrophic spiritual collapse. Remember, the three non-negotiable written promises the people swore to keep in chapter 10. Every single one of them has been shattered. First, they swore not to neglect the house of God. But when Nehemiah inspects the temple, he finds the storerooms empty. The people stopped bringing their offerings. The Levites and musicians, left with no financial support, have abandoned the temple and fled to the fields just to survive. But the detail that cuts deepest is who is currently living in the empty rooms. The high priest had cleared out a massive chamber in the courts of God and handed the keys to Tobiah the Ammonite. This is the same Tobiah who mocked the builders, the same Tobiah who conspired to slaughter the Jews in chapter 4. He could not breach the physical wall with an army, so the corrupt leadership simply invited him in and gave him an apartment in the holy center. The limestone perimeter kept the enemy out, but the unredeemed heart invited him right back in. Second, the people had sworn to guard the Sabbath, but as Nehemiah walks through the city, in bitter, agonizing despair, Nehemiah's final recorded words are not a victory speech, but a desperate, exhausted plea for God to remember that he at least tried on the day of rest. The streets are loud with commerce. He hears the heavy grinding of wine presses. He sees donkeys loaded with grain. Merchants from Tyre have set up markets inside the gates, shouting over each other to sell fish and foreign merchandise. The sacred rhythm of rest has been completely swallowed by greed. Third, they had sworn to protect their families from pagan idolatry. But Nehemiah discovers that the men of Judah have married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. The cultural assimilation is so rapid and severe that half of their children cannot even speak the language of Judah. The distinct identity of God's people is evaporating into the surrounding culture. The external behavior modification has completely failed. The moment the strong leader left, the internal rot consumed the city. Nehemiah's reaction is not a polite leadership summit. He does not cast a new vision or organize a committee to assess the damage. He explodes in violent, righteous rage. He storms into the temple and physically throws all of Tobiah's household furniture out into the street. He aggressively confronts the nobles, demanding to know why the house of God is forsaken. He stations his own armed guards at the gates to lock out the merchants. And then, he turns on the men who compromised their families. The text is brutally honest. The contradiction is impossible to ignore. The problem is not that the wall was built incorrectly. Nehemiah says, "I argued with those people, put curses on them, hit some of them, and pulled out their hair." This is the crushing reality of Nehemiah 13. The great visionary leader is not cutting a ribbon in victory. He is violently attacking the citizens in the streets. The book ends in total spiritual failure. The strictest laws, the strongest walls, and the most disciplined leadership could not produce a faithful heart. If the Bible is meant to encourage us, why does God allow this story to end in such dark, agonizing despair? The despair is exactly the point. It is a mirror held up to our own frantic attempts at self-salvation. We often read the Bible, expecting it to provide a list of practical principles to improve our lives. We assume that if we just follow the right steps, establish the right boundaries, and cast the right vision, everything will hold together. When we do this, we treat our spiritual lives exactly like Nehemiah's wall. When we sense internal decay, a failing relationship, or a hidden moral compromise, our immediate instinct is to start building. We construct massive behavioral walls to keep the darkness out. We fortify our schedules. We set up new productivity systems. We distance ourselves from bad influences. We sign our own invisible, binding covenants with God. The engineering was sound. The limestone was strong. The problem is that the people living inside those walls were still deeply, dangerously broken, standing at our own personal Watergate, promising that we will read our Bibles more, pray harder, and never make the same mistake again. We are desperately applying Shazak, trying to bind our shattered pieces together with nothing but sheer human willpower. Is there anything wrong with discipline? Is it unbiblical to set boundaries? Not at all. The biblical text does not condemn the building of the wall. Jerusalem needed a physical barrier to survive the immediate, violent threats of the ancient Near East. Boundaries are necessary for survival, but the crushing ending of Nehemiah forces us to confront a terrifying limitation. Behavior modification cannot cure internal corruption. A boundary can stop a behavior, but it cannot change a nature. A strict financial system can stop you from spending money, but it cannot kill the hidden greed rooted in your chest. A rigid daily routine can keep you productive, but it cannot heal your underlying anxiety. Accountability software can block a destructive image, but it cannot purify a poisoned appetite. You can build the thickest, tightest wall imaginably. You can enforce the strictest religious rules in your home. But if your heart remains unchanged, you will eventually find a way to invite the enemy into the temple yourself. You will quietly hand the keys of your own life. He navigates his animal slowly through the Kidron Valley, the silence broken only by the sound of hooves slipping against shattered rock. The central question of this book is not how to cast a vision or defeat your critics. The real question is this: over to the very things you were trying to lock out. The fortress will fail from the inside. When readers finally face the end of Nehemiah, they often feel deeply discouraged. It feels as if the entire 52-day miracle was a pointless waste of energy. But God did not place this tragic ending in Scripture to depress you. He placed it there to exhaust you. He wants to exhaust your reliance on your own strength. He wants to definitively break the illusion that if you just had a better system, a stronger leader, or more self-control, you could finally make yourself holy. The violent, agonizing frustration of Nehemiah screaming in the streets is the exact frustration of the law itself. The law can demand righteousness. It can punish you when you fail. It can even force momentary compliance. But it has absolutely no power to change what you actually love. It can govern the outside, but it cannot resurrect the inside. This is not ultimately a story about how to build a great organization or become a visionary leader. It is a story about the absolute impossibility of saving yourself through human effort. But this despair is not the final word. It is a necessary, painful preparation. If the greatest governor, the strictest laws, and the strongest wall could not save God's people, what can? If the building project was a miraculous success, why does the story end in absolute failure? This is not ultimately a story about building walls. The bitter, unresolved ending of Nehemiah creates a massive, agonizing vacuum in the biblical narrative, and that vacuum can only be filled by one event in history. The crushing failure of Nehemiah's wall forces us to look beyond the physical architecture of Jerusalem. It points directly to the ancient promises of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Those prophets knew the law could not save an unredeemed people. They looked past the rubble and promised a day when God would inaugurate a new covenant. God declared that He would no longer write His law on fragile parchment. He would write it directly on the human heart. He would remove the cold, dead heart of stone and replace it with a living heart of flesh. He would place His own Spirit inside His people, centuries after Nehemiah's furious, violent despair. Another leader rides into the city of Jerusalem, but Jesus of Nazareth does not arrive to inspect the physical fortifications. He does not arm His followers with swords and trowels to defend a geographical perimeter. Instead, He goes to a Roman cross outside the city gates to do exactly what the law, the governor, and the limestone could never accomplish. He takes the internal, fatal corruption of His people upon Himself. He does not just manage their sin with a forced covenant, He completely pays for it, and then breaks its power from the inside out. Jesus is the true and greater builder. He succeeds exactly where Nehemiah's project ended in tragedy. Nehemiah shows us three profound, unchanging realities. It is a story about the terrifying limits of external restoration. We are about to discover what happens when you fix the outside of your life, the exhaustion of human effort, the absolute limits of external religion, and the terrifying truth that a secure boundary cannot resurrect a dead soul. Think back to that opening image. Imagine the solitary rider moving silently through the dark, reaching out to touch the charred, splintered limestone of the city. We all have those ruined places in our lives. We all know the ash of our own failures, our hidden compromises, and our broken promises. And our immediate, frantic instinct is always the same. We start desperately stacking the broken pieces back together in the dark, hoping that if we can just make the outside look strong, the inside will magically heal. But God does not stand over the ruins of your life, demanding that you chazak, that you bind the dead stones together with your own exhausted willpower. He does not demand that you fix your own heart before he is willing to enter the gates. The New Testament gives us a radically different image. The Apostle Peter writes that because of Christ, we are no longer building with dead, burned rubble. He says that you yourselves, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house. Jesus takes the broken, charred pieces of our lives and breathes his own spirit into them. He does not merely repair the old nature. He creates a completely new one. You can stop fighting the exhausting, impossible war of self-salvation. You can stop frantically patching the cracks in your own righteousness, but leave the internal rot completely untouched. To understand this violent, tragic ending, we cannot start by looking at the finished architecture. You do not need a stricter set of rules to keep the darkness out. You need the light of the world to move in. The wall of self-effort will always eventually fall. The only permanent defense is a resurrected heart. The ruins are not the end of the story. We have to return to the charred, broken stones of the ruins. We have to understand the invisible war, waiting for Nehemiah in the dark, and ask what was actually broken when the story began. To understand why the stones of Jerusalem are still scattered, we have to look 800 miles to the east, to the winter capital of the Persian Empire. Susa was a city of unimaginable wealth, military dominance, and absolute political control. Its palaces were lined with marble pillars and gold, and inside this fortress of King Artaxerxes, Nehemiah held a position of profound access. He was the king's cupbearer. We often read that title and imagine a glorified waiter, but in the ancient Near East, the cupbearer was an executive official, a trusted advisor. The debris is so thick, so violently piled up, that in some places the animal cannot even pass. The rider has to dismount and walk, and the last line of defense against assassination. Nehemiah tasted the king's wine and handled his food. He stood in the presence of the most powerful man on earth every single day. If the king's enemies wanted him dead, they had to go through Nehemiah first. It was a life of extreme luxury, massive political influence, and constant mortal danger. Yet, despite his success in Persia, Nehemiah is haunted by a city he has likely never seen more than a century earlier. The Babylonian army had systematically destroyed Jerusalem. They burned the temple, dismantled the walls, and dragged the survivors into exile. The prophets had warned this would happen, but the prophets had also promised that one day, God would bring his people back. Isaiah and Ezekiel spoke of a glorious return. God would restore the city, remove their heart of stone, and breathe new life into their dry bones. The exile would end, and a restored kingdom would rise. And historically, the geographical return had actually happened. In 539 BC, the Persians conquered Babylon. King Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to go home. Thousands packed their belongings and made the agonizing, months-long trek back to the Promised Land. They rebuilt the altar. He reaches out in the cold night air and touches the massive limestone blocks. They are charred, splintered, covered in decades of dirt and ash. They laid the foundation for a modest new temple. Decades later, a priest named Ezra arrived to teach the law. By the time Nehemiah receives word from his brother about the state of Jerusalem, the people have been back in the land for nearly 100 years. The physical distance of the exile has been crossed, but the spiritual distance remains completely untouched. The report Nehemiah receives in Susa is devastating. The remnant in Jerusalem is in great distress and disgrace. The walls are broken down. The gates are burned with fire. The glorious prophetic promises of a renewed Eden and a triumphant, holy nation have not materialized. Instead, the returned exiles are weak, impoverished, and defenseless. They are surrounded by hostile neighbors and relentlessly taxed by the Persian machine. Later in the book, the people will cry out in a moment of bitter, heartbreaking honesty, "We are slaves today. Here in the land you gave our ancestors to enjoy its fruit and its good gifts, we are slaves." This is the agonizing reality of Nehemiah's era. The exile was supposed to be over, but the people are still living in its shadow. They have changed their geographical location, but they have not escaped their captivity. A physical return did not produce a spiritual resurrection. The year is 445 BC, and the writer is Nehemiah. For generations, modern readers have treated his story as the ultimate biblical manual for leadership, and this is where the danger of external restoration begins to reveal itself. When Nehemiah hears this news, he collapses in grief. He fasts for days. He prays. Finally, he risks his life by appearing visibly sad in the presence of the Persian king, an act that could easily be interpreted as treason or a threat to the monarch. But Artaxerxes grants him permission, along with imperial timber and armed escorts, to travel to Judah and rebuild the city. Nehemiah leaves the luxury of Susa and rides into the ruined landscape of his ancestors. He believes that if he can just secure the perimeter, if he can just rebuild the walls and hang the defensive gates, the dignity and safety of the people will return. He arrives in the dark to fix the visible problem. But as soon as the sun rises over the rubble, he immediately encounters an invisible war. The moment the first stone is lifted from the ash, the resistance begins. It does not start with an army. It starts with a sneer. Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite hear that the Jews are rebuilding, and their immediate response is mockery. "What are those feeble Jews doing?" they ask. "Will they restore their wall in a day? If even a fox climbed up on it, he would break down their wall of stones." In modern sermons and leadership seminars, this is the moment where the story is often reduced to a motivational cliché. If you attend a corporate seminar or a church leadership conference, you will inevitably hear about him. Sanballat and Tobiah have become spiritual slang for haters. We are told that whenever you attempt something great for God, or whenever you pursue your personal destiny, you will face critics. The standard application is simple: ignore the negativity, refuse to come down from the wall, and keep building your dream. But treating this text as a manual for ignoring your critics severely trivializes the history. Sanballat and Tobiah were not petty rivals, leaving negative comments. They were powerful, ruthless regional governors. Sanballat controlled Samaria to the north. Tobiah influenced the region to the east, along with Geshem the Arab to the south. They had Jerusalem completely surrounded, a fortified, independent Jerusalem meant a disruption in their trade routes, a loss of political control, and a shift in regional power. As the wall begins to rise and the gaps begin to close, the mockery turns into a conspiracy for mass murder. In Nehemiah 4, the surrounding nations plot to launch a surprise attack, infiltrate the city, and slaughter the builders. The psychological warfare is intense. The Jewish workers who live near the borders hear the rumors and run to Jerusalem, warning the builders 10 times over, "Wherever you turn, they will attack us." The workers are exhausted, terrified, and staring into the darkness. His book is frequently used to teach vision casting, strategic planning, team building, and dealing with critics, waiting for the slaughter to begin. Nehemiah's response is brilliant. He does not simply tell the people to pray and ignore the threat. He arms them. He stations families behind the lowest points of the wall with swords, spears, and bows. He divides his own men half hold weapons, while the other half carry building materials. The workers carrying loads do their work with one hand and hold a weapon in the other. Every builder wears a sword strapped to his side. The trumpeter stays beside Nehemiah, ready to sound the alarm so they can rush to the point of attack. They sleep in their clothes. They carry their weapons even when they go for water. It is one of the most cinematic, heroic images in the entire Old Testament. The people refuse to surrender. They match the external threat with fierce, unrelenting discipline. To a reader looking for a leadership manual, this is the absolute peak of the story. Nehemiah is managing the crisis perfectly. He has united a fractured people, neutralized a military threat, and kept the project moving forward. He is proving that external opposition cannot stop a people committed to a divine task. But the external enemies were never the greatest threat to Jerusalem's survival. We become so mesmerized by the swords on the wall and the threats on the horizon that we miss the structural collapse. It is presented as a triumphant, step-by-step blueprint for accomplishing great things for God. It is the definitive success story happening behind the lines. We think the greatest danger to the people of God is the hostility of the surrounding culture. But the wall is going up, and a terrifying fracture is opening right beneath Nehemiah's feet. While everyone is watching the horizon for an attack, the real sabotage begins on the inside. Read through the 3rd chapter of Nehemiah, and you will notice a relentless, driving rhythm. The chapter is a long list of names, families, and gates, recording exactly who built which section of the wall. But beneath the list of names, a single Hebrew verb repeats more than 30 times, like the strike of a hammer. The word is kazak. English Bibles usually translate it simply as repaired or rebuilt. The text will read, next to him, Uzziel repaired the wall, or Meshullam repaired the section in front of his house. The translation is accurate, but the English word is narrower than the Hebrew expression. Chazak does not merely mean to construct or mend. It means to bind fast, to strengthen, to fortify, or to make firm. It is the language of bracing for impact. Elsewhere in Scripture, when God commands Joshua to be strong and courageous before entering the Promised Land, he uses Chasak to 100 into the fair. When the text says that Pharaoh's heart was hardened against Moses, it uses Chasak. And for the first half of the narrative, it appears to be exactly that. Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem and rallies a deeply discouraged, fractured community. It describes making something unyielding, rigid, and deeply entrenched. In the ancient world, rebuilding a ruined wall was not like laying new, perfectly cut bricks. The workers in Jerusalem were dealing with scorched, cracked limestone left over from the Babylonian siege. To Chazak, the wall meant to take weak, vulnerable, shattered material, and bind it together with mortar so tightly that it could withstand the crushing force of a battering ram. Section by section, family by family, they are applying Chazak to the perimeter of Jerusalem. They are fortifying the stones. They are reinforcing the timber. But as the physical perimeter becomes harder, a dangerous illusion begins to take shape. The illusion is the belief that if the perimeter is strong, the city is safe. We naturally assume that if the boundary is secure, the people living inside are automatically protected. But the repeated use of this word reveals the tragic irony of the entire project. The people were exhausting themselves to fortify the limestone, while their own hearts remained dangerously fragile, unprotected, and prone to compromise. They were binding the stones together, but their society was breaking apart. They were making the gates unyielding, but their own spiritual condition was decaying. This is the trap of prioritizing behavior modification over internal transformation. It is entirely possible to fortify the outside of your life while the center rots. We do this constantly. When we feel spiritual or emotional threat, our instinct is to use Chasak on our boundaries. We strengthen our disciplines,